So just hang tight, okay? Yeah. It's just that it's not really clear what we need right now, and there's a lot going on. So
so yes, you don't want to bring one more person into something like this.
yeah, exactly. And we're just trying to see where things are kind of landing because there's just a lot happening. So, but I mean, so just hang tight in there. Yeah.
I guess two other things, and but I'd much rather stay in this end rather than go to Vanguard or Water.
Right. Oh, okay, because you live up here.
I live up here.
Got it.
So I hope that this works out.
Awesome.
Leo, what do you use to keep the Mac on all the time?
To keep the Mac on all the time.
All the time, like so it doesn't go to sleep.
I mean, I usually just this is the power setting.
It is.
Yeah, it's like
It used to not be.
You're supposed to just keep using it.
I mean, mine goes on non-screensaver, but a lot.
Yeah, mine too.
It doesn't
But
turn off, but it.
yeah, mine too, and it should be fine because this guy and this guy will still run. But want to make
I
sure.
think if you go to like energy saver and just turn off all the energy
Yeah,
saver
yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
it'll stay
yeah.
on.
Okay.
Right there.
All right there. Okay, sorry. Oh, look at that. Never.
Yep.
Fuck me. When did that come?
I don't know. OS 9.
No. Like fucking 2 years ago, my Mac wouldn't
I have no
like.
idea. I have no idea.
I had a little. I had this guy, anti-sleep.
Oh,
This little app.
I hate like downloading random details.
Well, it's from the App Store, so at least I trust a
okay.
little bit, you know.
At least that's better.
No.
People are always like, download this thing to do this. I'm like, I'd rather just not do that. Like, I don't. I just.
Let's see if we can make it when this plays. You can be able to see.
in C# and .NET because that's the world I'm in right now. It made I just I could do that like this. And that's what I'm taking a real back and like I've settled on my front-end framework that we use. I've Node in the back end just makes sense on a lot of things. GraphQL is the next thing I'm going to tackle off my list from once I do that unpack. And that's it.
Wait a minute. But I can't turn off the screensaver. I think it doesn't matter.
Yeah, are we looking at?
Do people from upstairs ever come down for talks and stuff?
I've never seen it. Maybe they're here and I didn't realize it, right? But I think they
Just
should.
in case there's anybody from upstairs that I still know. I don't know. I kind of went after the contract ended. I never heard from. Well, I mean.
One second. Hello? No. Hello? Hello? Oh man. My what is it called? My college fund. My college debt. Fuck.
Wow.
Yeah. No, so that's calling, right? So they're gonna pay me. The problem is, I haven't been to college since I was in Canada. So my college debt has to be in Canada. Oh wait, I don't have a college debt. Wait.
Okay.
Sorry,
wow. Yeah,
sorry,
that,
man.
That happened to me yesterday with like.
They get calls all the time. This light sucks. All right, that works. I'll have to go with that.
So Daniel, if it's any, when I interviewed another guy, he like straight up lied to me. He like straight up lied to me. Like the dude trying to pull a fast one.
What he
just
said?
lied. He was making it sound like he had experience in React.
Oh.
And I kind of knew he did it from before, but then I was like, oh, maybe I heard wrong.
Yeah.
So then I was like, oh, so how did like he was talking about how he deployed the app or whatever. I'm like, oh, how'd you deploy the app? And he's like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, why would you lie? Like,
It's just nervousness, man. I literally had this conversation.
No, it wasn't nervousness because I kind of circled back around. I'm like, this guy's lying, man. I'm like, why would you lie about that?
Because this morning I had an interview.
When he couldn't even say that, right? I mean, I think what happened is that if he had said that, I would have been like, maybe I would have at least fallen for it. But I think he was trying to take credit for another team that was doing the React.
Got it.
But I had already told Italians, I'm like, I don't care what it is, as long as it doesn't matter, But I guess because they figured we're doing React, if he figured we're doing React, he would just try to get it. But I'm like, dude, what am I supposed to do after that?
Today I had the opposite. I have this manager that says, okay, well, when you send stuff to the web service, what do you send it as? You know, you can send posts, you can send a payload. You can send, what is it called? What? You send the post, get, put, update. You know, and I can tell you the difference between update and
Like patch.
patch. Thank you. And I'm like, what did you want to see here? Oh, I want to hear JSON.
Oh.
Fuck's sakes, come on. What do you?
Some people are so like
They're stuck in their.
They gotta hear one.
They got to get that word.
Yeah, don't lie. I mean.
Yes, no. I wasn't trying to say I was going to lie, but.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's just so.
Yeah, you're right.
You're screwed, like.
Yeah.
I'd rather tell the truth and miss out on an opportunity than walk
Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes he's nervous. Something like that. I remember in when I got to San Francisco, everybody was amazing. It just felt, I told you this.
Yeah.
They just felt like they just didn't want to give me the job because I was from Florida. They didn't want to give me the job in Florida, including the guys who gave me the job, the Skype, right? So the guys came in here, and he was this Romanian guy, and he's like, you know, and I seemed to answer every single question wrong. He would correct me all the time, correct me all the time. I'm like, jeez. And the recruiter called me back and says, "You got it." And I'm like, I must, because there was other people. I must have figured some. I mean, I was just by the skin of my teeth, just barely. Right?
Yeah.
A month later, a guy comes in there. My manager says, "You know, you really blew my pants off with your interview." And I'm like,
Yeah.
made me feel like shit. And
Right.
like every single question was wrong, and I
Yeah.
blew your mind out. And he wasn't being
Sometimes you never-
sarcastic, right? He's
sometimes you never
Romanian.
know, yeah.
He means literally, I impressed him very much.
Got it.
Oh my God. Oh. But no, you're not from San Francisco, not gonna get hired unless you do a remote.
Well, my
How
experience.
do they find you? Sorry.
My director, him and I had worked together before, so after the Frank thing, it's what made the most sense.
Awesome.
But
It's
my
full-time.
My experience there is that they're I mean, at least the engineers from San Francisco that I've worked with,
Yeah.
they're pretty much at the same level as the
Oh, yeah.
average engineer here. But they just have way more access to things, right? To companies, to meet up, to everything.
The Angular meetup was spectacular. First, it was 200-300 people.
Yeah.
And the presentations, oh my God.
Yeah.
It was the guy who makes Angular, the guy who did this.
Right.
One guy who had made a front end and back end all merged together, and it was just amazing. So, hey, how are you?
Good.
Come on in.
Yeah, it's exact. I went to a meetup once there, and it was the same thing, like 300 people, like craft beers, like in this beautiful, like in the Uber building. I'm
Yes.
like, it's not even fair, you know. Like,
Yeah.
to get a job like that here, it's like almost impossible. And there, you can be like relatively mediocre. Because there's just so much opportunity.
Yeah.
So much.
And a lot of people, they just need people.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was.
And it's easy to raise money too. Like one of the guys I worked with, I introduced him to React. He left the company to start his own company, and where all he does is React. And he like raised money. I mean, I'm like, it's not even yeah.
Holy shit.
It's like he's doing like a meditation app.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Very little for it, but I love
Yeah, I'm telling you, and I met the wrong guy because I did this one. I met this one. I told you, right? I met this one guy, has a great idea. Went home 4 hours later. Check your email. What says APK install on your Android phone? There's your idea. It looks like shit, and it's fake data, right? All of a sudden, there's 30 people around you that are in this kind of what is it? Where you look at people dating?
Oh, Tinder.
Yeah, like Tinder, but they're not really there, right? It's all fake data. They're always around you. They're always in the exact same space. And that's it. He just deflated, and nothing happened. So just,
But I mean, there's so much, you know. Like,
yes, sir.
How
How are you?
doing?
I'm
Giovanni.
Damien.
What's your name?
Damien.
Damien. Okay, Gio.
Gio.
Nice meeting you.
Leo? That's the guy you
Hey,
want to
Leo.
talk to.
Nice meeting you. How's it going?
Good, how are you?
I just make sure that you guys can see us on the internet.
Let your dogs
Again, presented.
So is this your guys' area building?
So this is Palm Beach Tech. It's a co-working space as well as an organization.
Okay. Oh,
And you can rent those places. You rent desks. I mean, this is sort of three desks. You can rent sort of private desks, in private offices. And they have a lot of events here. So if you go to the website, sign up and all that, and you get referrals and things like that from the website. It's just it's more than just a space. It's more like an organization for the Palm Beach Tech community.
Okay. Awesome.
Palm Beach.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I used to work at Business Studio with them.
Where? At Arrow?
Arrow Consulting.
I worked there too.
Yeah, when?
All last year until November. October.
Yeah, I worked there 3 years. Worked there 5 years.
Nice. You like it?
Yeah, I just didn't like the travel.
Where are you from? Fort Lauderdale?
No, right here. Down the street.
Travel where?
Travel abroad. Like India and
Oh, you have to go to. Oh, okay.
yeah, and San Francisco.
What did you do? What did you do?
I was a senior consultant
Well, what did you have to travel?
to go and meet with the customers.
Fantastic.
Yeah, you have to do it like every 2 weeks.
You know Etienne? Bo?
Well, I know.
Yeah, those two guys. No, not Bo so much, but Etienne travels a lot. People nowadays, and I mean, at least they don't seem to do it as much. I don't see people doing it.
Yeah, our account was PwC.
But you're a developer or a PM? A PM.
No, I'm a senior consultant.
Got it.
And I'm a developer.
Excellent. Fantastic. An important guy if you need to travel.
I know.
Me in Germany didn't need to travel at all.
I didn't have to. I couldn't do it. Found something that it wasn't as amazing. Yeah, I get to work from home. And I get to do JavaScript.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
No front end.
No, it's all we do. Like in our company, it's called Smart Computer, and we do both the back end and the front end. So it's all done.
I know Smart Computer. Great company. Great company.
Did you interview?
I did. They hired you. You're obviously a fantastic. You're obviously a fantastic worker.
I was the third person they hired.
Fantastic. Amazing.
So I've been there for a long time.
It's fun.
Yeah, it has its good times, like everything else.
It sounds like you guys are going to revolutionize the business, and it sounds amazing. I think
Yeah,
what they're doing is amazing.
We're in the bleeding edge of JavaScript. If there was if you can call using the latest stuff that hasn't been released yet. But it's happening. Sam and I just work at you will meet Sam. He's really good.
So do you run BuzzFeed the same? Same?
BuzzFeed?
Okay, sorry.
Sam is he got hired there because he brought me work.
So he was a second. Very nice.
Actually, he was almost the first guy, but then he left because they were trying to do .NET. He didn't want to build the application using .NET root.
Also, you said no.
And that's, see, the funny thing is that Arrow was a .NET shop at the beginning. And then we like started doing more stuff for PwC, Raul, you know Raul. So we started doing stuff with Raul, and we started using, not the standard UI HTML based, but so at one point, it became more diversified, but in the beginning it was just I actually was with them when they were not trouble.
Nice.
It was only like 6 people.
Amazing. We've been in all these new companies since the beginning.
Yeah.
Lucky man.
They're good people. The people are Arrow.
I
think you hate them.
I hate Raul. He's
Hate Raul.
and the other guy. They, whenever a project screws up, it's usually because they got it. Now, I think they are wonderful owners and they're just sitting at the beach. They're good people. If they step out of the way, the good things happen. Because there was full of amazing amazing artists. But when the owners get in the way, projects fail.
We never failed. When I was there,
Maybe it's a different Raul and Ryan.
No, Raul, Ryan. I used to travel with.
Different things as a person,
Oh.
but they've changed over time.
Yeah, I used to travel with them.
They created a great business. Jeremy works there. He's a content developer team. I used to work there. I thought that my coworkers were amazing. I thought the projects they have are good. Regardless of that, I'm glad that you're smart procurement. You chose amazing.
Yeah, smart procurement.
Both. So you got the beginning. You'll get bored of smart procurement when the next big huge company comes in.
No, I only moved from Arrow because I didn't want to travel. And they told me that as the company grew, I was probably going to be moving from that position to less of the developer architect position,
More of the manager.
more of the management. And I didn't really say it's going to be more traveling and stuff. I know what I did. And actually, it was a good thing because my wife got sick about a year after I did.
Be careful, they was just cleaning that. So you guys don't have to go, just wait a second.
She actually passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Like 3 years.
I'm sorry to hear that.
So when I moved away from them, actually it was a perfect place because I got to spend time at home with my family. So it was horrible. But I still have lunch with them. Actually, I was at the office.
I haven't worked this year. It didn't work with my Ryan's attitude didn't work.
You get along with Bo?
Yes. Bo, so when I left
most people that left was because they didn't get along.
I find Bo easy to get along with, and I find Ryan very good. Now remember, it's always fun.
What team were you in?
Just with it was a new division of PwC, the ERP. We didn't have any products. They had 2 new products. PwC closed a bunch of things, so I think Ryan was just getting a little bit nervous. You know the projects, right? So remember that they have a brand new .NET Core project that they want to do that was supposed to be this master project that all the other projects we can inherit from. So I was originally supposed to take over that team, and then that collapsed. So then they created another team, and that's collapsed, and we find out it was Ryan.
Was it in Dallas?
No.
Was it one in Dallas?
No, it's PwC.
Yeah, PwC Dallas or
no, PwC Television.
okay, so
Or whatever that is in Florida. Doesn't matter. You like him? You're good?
I know Ryan forever. So
A lot of people.
we actually go to the same churches.
Is that right?
So we have known each other. But I kind of like keep business.
All right, can I get everybody's attention real quick? It's 6:35. So usually this thing starts around 6:30, and we have about 30 minutes worth of like networking and mingling, right? So the presenter is Leo. He's going to talk to us about functional programming. I do have a couple announcements I want to get to before we hand it over. 2 topics. So I see some familiar faces and I see some new faces. Is anybody aware that we're going to have a JavaScript conference come to West Palm? You guys aware of that concept? Well, it's happening. So we've officially made it going down. It's happening October 18th, 19th, and 20th. And it will be everything. It'll be a 2-day track, or a 2-day event, 1 track. And we're still locking in some of the details as far as location goes. But we're getting some really great responses for our speakers, and the topics are coming in are pretty hot. So it'll be all things JavaScript, front end, back end, robotics, and everything in between. So we're really looking forward to that. Is anybody not on the Palm Beach Tech Space emailing list? Right? So I think you guys, who here has heard about Palm Beach Tech? All right, so majority of everybody. So Palm Beach Tech is an organization trying to bring the tech community to Palm Beach County. It has several adventures. One of this thing is the space we're in now. It's a co-working space. So if you're looking for a desk, a simple chair, or an office, please reach out to Palm Beach Tech and they will get you what you need. It's a great place to be a part of. So they're sponsoring tonight's event as far as the location goes. So the conference is October 18th, 19th, and 20th. The 20th, 21st, and 22nd is our hackathon. Who here does not know what a hackathon is? Everyone knows what a hackathon is? All right, very cool. Don't know or do know? A little bit of both?
Yeah, I'd like to hear it.
All right, so the point of a hackathon is usually people to get together. You have a marketer, you have a designer, you have a developer. They come together, form teams, build an idea in a short amount of time, and present it for judges to see the business. That's typically what a hackathon is for. We like to do things a little differently in the context of we're not seeding businesses here, right? The point of Palm Beach Tech, reaching out to the community and finding a nonprofit that's technology hungry, figuring out what we can do to benefit them, present it to the hackathoners, and they spend 2 days working toward that. This year, we are working with STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. This all has everything to do with connecting students with technology, and it's all sorts of good things. They are in dire need of a lot of stuff. So we are working with them to get them up and running with something a little bit more on the WordPress website and bad data. So look forward to that coming through. Once we have those details, you guys will be presented at that. There is limited seating for the hackathon. So register soon. When we get out, if you're not on the Palm Beach Tech email list, that's where most of our communication will go out through. So if you're not on there, get on there. Those are the two announcements I wanted to make. Conference and hackathon. So without further ado, let's give it up for Leo.
All right, so the title of the talk is Everyday Functional Programming in JavaScript. And we're going to kind of look into the tip of the iceberg of what functional programming is, right? This can be a very esoteric subject, and if you really get into it, you get into the foundation behind it with this, which is algebraic based. And so what we're going to deal with now is just the very simple things that we can all do to make our code more functional and better, and we'll talk about why that is. All right. So I'm here from South Florida. I've been a developer since 2004. Started out in .NET as a .NET developer, but now I'm just mostly focused on JavaScript. Over the last few years, I mean, we've all seen how exciting the JavaScript world has been and will continue to be. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited to be part of this. And functional programming is part of what excites me about JavaScript. So why? Well, before I get into this, I mean, how many of you guys are familiar with the concept? Familiar with it? Okay, okay. So why? The main idea is that functions, right, regular old JavaScript functions, like nothing fancy, are the basic unit blocks of your code, right? So in object-oriented programming, which is what maybe a lot of us have been doing for the last, 10, 20 years, right? The basic unit there was an object. And with this, it's kind of taking a step back and saying, well, no, the function should be the basic unit. The reason for that is that it ended up that a lot of the things we loved about object-oriented programming, like inheritance and state within the object, which seemed really cool, tended to break down over time, especially as applications got larger. So functional programming is actually a concept that I don't know if it historically precedes object-oriented programming, but certainly in the last 10 years or so has kind of taken over in a way. Although they can both be used side to side. And so functions end up being a good atomic unit versus objects because everyone knows their inputs, which is just arguments, and the output. So hopefully you can create a truth table even of every possible value that can go into your input of your function, and then what comes out. So it's a discrete mapping between the two. With objects, you don't quite get that because they're just too complex of units. Again, unlike objects, just tend to be simple And then the other main idea with functional programming is having side effects. So if you have a simple function, you don't have to deal with the side effects of it that you, for example, have to deal with an object, which has state, and then the state can be inherited. And so a change to a state in one object can cause a change in another one, or maybe up and down the inheritance hierarchy. With this, I mean, as long as you keep your functions pure and clean, and you know what's coming in, then you know what's coming out. So here's an example of a unit, right? This is a JavaScript function. It squares numbers, right? And so we see that nothing can pollute the output, right? It's just one single input, which in this case it's a range of integers, and then the output is just that input squared. So if you can kind of keep that thought in mind, everything else builds upon that, right? Another main idea is that data and functional programming is supposed to be immutable. So with objects, we had state within the object, and then you could mutate the state, and you had sort of gatekeepers with your functions and your methods inside your object that were supposed to kind of keep track of all that. If you guys have ever done like a lot of .NET or Java programming with threading and all of that, then you know that a problem you run into is having to lock state so that multiple threads can access it. With functional programming, with the data being immutable, it can be shared across threads, and it's just a different way of dealing with it. I'm kind of oversimplifying it, but that's the main idea. So yeah, the data immutability helps with keeping things simple and parallel processing. You can kind of see this idea trickle down with ES6, right, with like the const keyword. So if you guys are programming in ES6 and you have a value and your value you don't need to mutate it, which most of the time you really don't, then the const keyword comes in. And so a lot of things we're seeing are sort of trickled down in order to aid in functional programming. One of my observations about functional programming is also that it's supposed to make the code declarative, and so it's easier to read and conveys the intention of the code. So if you look at sort of procedural, right, more typical procedural code, the code shows how it does something. But with this, it's like you're telling the code what to do. So if you have a loop that sums integers in an array, you kind of you iterate over the loop and you add it yourself and then you return it back. With this, you tell it how to sum it. So simpler to read, but maybe a little bit harder to write because you have to know what to call to sum it. And here's kind of a pseudo-code-ish type of thing example of a function that is functional, right? It's written in a functional way. So here is my function, which is called my best customers. And then you can kind of see that it chains other functions. And so if a developer, if you write something like this and someone comes in behind you and reads this, it's very easy to see what it does. So you wouldn't necessarily have to then, and then hopefully if it's truly functional, then all the code within these functions are also written that same way. So then at no point are you really having to like go through a crazy loop that's got a million counters and you're trying to decipher what it does. And it's supposed to be self-documenting. So I was having this conversation with someone last week about code comments being bad, and I'm a subscriber of that philosophy, that code comments are bad. So you make your code sort of be self-documented as much as possible. But not everyone agrees with me, so.
Disagree.
Huh? Disagree, okay. So again, like a lot of us are working already in a functional way without us really realizing it. So React, how many of you guys do React or Vue or something like that? So you know you're already doing functional programming, right? What's a React component? It's just a function, right? It's just a plain old JavaScript function. It takes in arguments and it spits out. The output is, well, JsRx markup, but it's JavaScript again. And here we have an example of that, right? So this would be like your typical H3 component in React, just the prop in and the markup out. You can create a truth, again, like the square, you can create a truth table to this. So yeah, let's do some live coding. Let's see how it goes. Any questions so far? Anything like, is it that you maybe?
I just saw you doing chaining. I've used chaining before where I had to make sure something got returned before finished. Is that an important part of the functional programming? So that you can have threads and parallel processing and stuff like that?
Yeah, so inside of here, you could do multiple things, right? I mean, this could work both ways. You could make it have it return, or the other thing is that it makes it easier to defer or to stream data. So let's say this list of customers isn't in memory yet, but it's being streamed in like from JSON, like from a web service call or from a WebSockets call or something. Then the call to these could be deferred, right? So, but yes, it's very important how the data is returned, especially in JavaScript. Yeah. Yeah.
So in contrast to the classic object-oriented programming, where like each object has properties and methods, methods are in essence are also functions. So what differentiates the methods from functions and functional programming?
So similar, but the data is independent of the behavior, right? So normally with something like this, then a lot of this behavior would be inside of the individual customer array, or the individual customer object inside of the array. Here it's separate, so that the data is completely independent. Let me also say that the two can coexist, right? And in React we have that too. Like you can declare a component that's a class, so you can use kind of the best of both worlds. If like for example, like in Java or JavaScript, you don't have a choice because functions aren't first-class citizens in either language. So you have to write classes and then write your functional code inside of it. Does that answer the question, more or less? Yep. Okay. So let's see if I can pull up some code of like JavaScript that we see everywhere, and then let's see if we can refactor it. Actually, let me turn the linter off. Huh? This is VS Code. Yeah. Let me just disable this for now.
Like that.
Can I harass you later about that?
Yeah. It's still not well. Whatever. I just don't want the squiggly lines to.
You gotta hit the reload after you disable it.
Oh yeah, there you go. Huh?
Turn that off.
I just don't want. Well, for you guys, it has to be turned on, but I don't want people to get confused by the squiggles. Actually, I'm going to turn it back on later and then show you that the linter is actually telling you to do things in a functional way a lot of times. So let's look at this code, right? Like this is typical code that you see everywhere. And let's rewrite it. Let's see if we can get to a pretty functional solution here. So we look at this, and then we see that it's kind of split into 3 different parts. This part does something. It's looping around doing something. This part does something. And then this part does something else, right? It's doing a sort. A lot of state mutation here. Here we create, an array, create another array. We're creating counters, and then we're creating variables inside of the loop to then push to the array. Very error prone. Actually, as I was writing this, and this is very simple, like I kept having issues. So let's see how we can take a stab at this. What this is really doing is it's looping through the customers array and saying if the balance property of this customer is greater than 5,000, then put it in an array, in another array. Then give me only the first names of these customers, and then sort the first name, right? And 1 second. And just so you guys know, this is the data that we're using, right? So I'm pretending to be part of the of Pied Piper here, and so we're going to. Everyone has a first and last name and a balance, right? So we want to filter out all the people with more than 5,000. Only return the first names and then sort them. Let me also show you guys that I have tests for this. So we have a test here for the customer. And then there's 3 tests, actually really only 2. The first one is that Leo should be one of the best customers. And then the other one is that the array should be sorted. So if I run the tests, also. So if I run the test, I see that it's passing, that they're passing at the moment. And so let's start kind of hacking this. How many people think I can get this down to like 2 lines of code, and it won't be like hacky. It'll still read great, right? Yeah, maybe 3. I don't know. But the point is that we're gonna go from like 50 to like 2 or 3, right?
Start with 10 and work your way down. Like, I can do this in less lines.
And then, by the way, all he means is put a bunch of semicolons and put it all in one line.
No. So let's see. I mean, maybe I can take some hints from the crowd here. How can I refactor this? You got this first block. So let's forget about the printing out the first name and the sorting. So I have a list of customers. I want just the ones that have over 5,000. Filter? Okay.
Maybe go into like kind of high order functions and JavaScript.
Yeah.
How they work.
Yep. Good point. Yep.
You could also use a ternary operator as well for the conditional.
Yeah. I can, but I don't really have. That doesn't quite apply here. But yeah, you can normally do that too. Yeah. So see that balance is greater than 5,000, right? And then I guess this is called array, but I'm going to rename it to something better because that's part of the refactoring here. So we're going to call it best customers, right? So now I have to change it here, and let's see if my tests are still passing. And they seem to be.
Did you run it?
So if I hit O, they'll rerun automatically every time I save the file. Let me just kind of show you guys that. So if I change the file and I hit save, it should auto reload. Yeah. Yeah, you see that? This is with Jest. Yeah. Yeah. Jest. Jest, JS, is the test framework from Facebook. Huh?
I don't want to do it. Could you explain how using Jest versus Jasmine?
Yeah. To be honest with you, I haven't used Jasmine or Mocha or anything like that in a while.
Okay.
But I know that Jest is sort of the new hotness. It's very similar. I'm not going to tell you that you can do something with Jest that you can do in Jasmine. Maybe except the CLI, right? Maybe this is maybe what you just saw is kind of the selling point. I know Jest does other things like snapshot testing, and it hooks into React testing too. So like you can very easily hook it into React and test your components. But for this purpose, there probably one isn't better than the other because we're just doing regular JavaScript testing here.
Next question.
Yeah.
Is best customers simply like potential that's only executed when it's properties called on it, or is it actually executed when you assign it?
It's executed in line, so it's being executed as. Yeah, by the time this line is run, by the time the program counter is on 5, best customers will have run.
Yeah, filter is a.
Yeah, it's not deferred.
Method on the prototype of array, so
Yeah.
it can be executed once it sees it.
It's not deferred, but I will show you. But I will show you deferred methods later. It's going to get a little confusing. You mentioned higher order functions, so .map, .filter, .reduce, .forEach. Those are like your bread and butter high order functions in almost every single language right now. They exist in every single modern language. In this case, we're using .filter, and a high order function is essentially a function that takes another function as an argument. So filter, what's happening here is that it takes in this function as an argument, right? So I can actually say, const greater than 5,000, right? And I can say C, or I can just copy that, balance 5,000. So I'm just trying to show you that the argument is a function. And that's essentially what a high order function is. Like in React, you have high order reducer, same thing, like a reducer, high order components takes in another component or function as an argument, same thing. And they're very, obviously they're very helpful, and they save you from writing this sort of imperative code. All right, so first names. How do we do this next part? Map. Okay. So we're gonna do C. Oh, sorry. Best customers. That map. And then we're gonna say C again, and then it's gonna say C that first name. Right. So perfect. Yep, that worked. So something failed here. What's failing should be sorted.
I think you're missing an S in first names.
Sorry?
I think it's missing an S.
Where?
Because the next thing down is looking for first names, plural.
Yep, it's here.
Oh, it's there.
So it's not,
No,
the
return
on the
dot net.
Yeah.
No, but that should be okay.
No, this is it, right?
Does the map, what you guys were talking about earlier, doesn't the map not execute until?
No, it's executing. It is being sorted. Well, maybe my test is bad. So then with sort, I dealt with this a little bit differently, but essentially what I did is that I kept it, I ended up using a sort from a different library to kind of simplify this. And the library that I used is called Ramda. How many of you guys have used that? Okay. Ramda, R-A-M, like Lambda, but with an R. Okay. Let me kind of skip ahead here. So this is kind of what I ended up with. Right? And let me see if my test passed now. Maybe my test is just bad. Although it was passing a second ago. So I ended up with this, but we can do even better, right? We can actually pipe these calls together and to really sort of put them succinctly. So let's try to do that. So we can actually say return, right? Filter, and then come here and say get rid of this assignment and say that map right on here. And then we can say, and then we can do the sort. Let me see what I did. Yeah, I ended up choosing the sort. So if we skip ahead, we kind of get to this, right? So we saw how we went from like a 30-line long function to basically 4 lines of code.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to put it in context. So you took some handwritten functions, which were really already implemented in the prototype functions. Basically called methods on objects and strung those together. So this really is, I'm trying to differentiate here. This is really object-oriented programming to some degree because you have an array of function methods on the
It's
What it means is that
Yeah.
sort and map are built in to the object, but it's
right.
It's the fact what is being passed from object to object.
So chain methods. And it's
Yeah.
So
okay.
Right. This isn't exclusive to functional programming. The next step of this is where the magic's gonna happen because we're not gonna be calling methods and objects anymore. We're gonna use independent functions that get called without the dot operator for each object that gets returned. But this still is functional versus procedural, right? And not necessarily completely object oriented because we're not manipulating the actual like customer object, right? But you're right that it's not exclusive to functional programming. And by the way, like that goes back to the point I made earlier of the two you can have sort of a hybrid of the two, right? You can have sort of a hybrid of the two. Because these are still objects, and in JavaScript, a function is a first-class citizen, but it still behaves sort of like an object because it has methods on itself.
The JavaScript sort would work there, right? Why did
Yeah.
you import the sort from Ramda?
Actually, this is kind of a misnomer. That'll work. Yeah, that'll work. The sort from Ramda is going to come in handy in the next phase, right? So what we're seeing here, though, is that exactly what the gentleman here kind of explained is that we're using these like methods on the JavaScript primitive objects to do this, and we can go a level even deeper to really kind of, scratch our nerd itch of being fully functional.
Yeah, I think a big difference in like object-oriented programming as well is that even though the methods exist on the object, the methods don't mutate the object.
Right.
It's static methods. Exactly. So because of prototype of inheritance, like they don't actually mutate the underlying object. They just kind of return like an immutable. They work as a pure function, right?
Exactly.
Immutable. Yeah, it's good. That's good.
So
that's like what it is.
And you hit on the keyword there, static methods. So like, let's say you wanted to build, if you wanted to do pure functional programming in Java or C# or an object-oriented language, essentially all of your objects would not have any instance methods. You would have essentially a collection of static methods, right? That's how you would do it. And that's what would give you sort of the behavior of a function being a first-class citizen. So you could just call them directly. And in C#, like a lot of this functional programming stuff was trickling down. Like I know that you could call static methods directly now before you didn't have to like specify the class. You could just call the static methods directly, and things like Lambda functions and stuff like that have been existing there for a long time. And link, like if you guys are familiar with like link in C#, it's essentially the high order function. It's just Microsoft named them differently just because that's what they did.
You know, instantiating an object, you just use the object as a template, right?
Exactly, right.
So where does this C coming from?
What's C?
The one
Yeah.
you're passing to filter?
So if you're not too familiar with the ES6 syntax, I know this can get very confusing. So essentially I'm gonna write the this balance function again, but like in the traditional JavaScript syntax. So I think it'll make more sense if you see it like this, right? So function greater than 5,000, right? And then C, right? Return C balance 5,000. This will help me explain a little bit of your question. The C comes from every iteration that from filter, right? So filter is going to essentially run this function for every item in the customers array, and it'll pass in the current customer as an argument.
Okay.
So that's where the C comes from. So we're going to get into something called functional composition, and it's one of those like axioms, sort of, or very fundamental concepts in functional programming. And functional composition is essentially something that we've all been doing in procedural programming. It's just it's laid out here a little bit different, a little bit more nice, so that it reads better and it's more declarative. But essentially, what functional composition is, let's say you have a function, right? Like let's say I have this function, and instead of this function, I'm calling another function. That's what functional composition is. So it greater than 5,000. I don't know. Let's say I had return. Say I had a greater than function. Return greater than, right? 5,000. That's essentially functional composition. With Ramda and the functional composition concept, you can lay them like one on top of the other, and it reads more sort of reads more procedural, but more declarative, I should say. And we're going to convert this code to use functional composition. So let me, before I get into that tangent, or before I get into that, let me show you guys the Ramda website. But a lot of you guys are familiar with like load dash and underscore, right? Yep. That's more familiar. So the difference between load dash and underscore and Ramda is that Ramda is more purely functional. And if you get into it, it's going to be very weird at first because the arguments are sort of flipped. And there are all the methods, all of these utility methods that a lot of these we're familiar with, they're all curryable. And I'll explain what a curryable function is later. But let's say, for example, the map function, right? Intuitively, and in load dash and underscore, the data goes in first, and then the mapping function, right? Here it's the opposite. And each individual argument, let's see, let me go back to map. Each individual argument, its call gets deferred. So if I were to call map and I give it the double as the function double, right? It's going to return another function that expects the second argument. Let me show that. So I can actually come here and say try Ramda. And let's do that. We'll say const map.
Yeah, you make it a little bigger.
Yeah. Const map 1 equals map, and let me give it, my function is going to be the squared function. So integer, right? If I log map 1, I'm going to get, I get another function. But now if I pass the data to map 1, I'll get my my squares. So let's do that. You see, 1, 4. So the whole framework is built around that concept. And I'm going to show you guys a couple more examples of curryable.
Where's the 1 being plugged in? Where's the 1 being used?
The 1 is here. So I'm passing in an array of 1 and 2, and it's returning 1 and 4. Square root of 1 is 1, square root of 2 is 4. Yeah. So I mean, huh?
It runs the entire series.
No. This is literally just 1 and 2.
Right.
No, if you put it 3,
Huh?
if you put it 3, you get a 9.
If you put a 3, you put a 9, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, the important point here is that the call to the original function returned another function, and that can go like indefinitely depending on on the function you're calling.
Does the current function have value like it has
Yes.
a closure?
Through a closure. Yep, it works through a closure. Exactly.
So why did you choose Ramda versus something like Lodash FP?
I just really like this concept. It's very powerful.
I mean, but you're
Oh.
aware of Lodash FP, right?
Right.
Lodash function.
I haven't used that. Is it similar?
Yeah, it's better.
Oh, okay. I haven't used that. Why is it better?
Because he knows it and you don't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
It's just
true.
performance.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's-
But it's the same. But it's the same. Is it like the same thing with curryable functions? Okay. That's the important point.
Very first day last.
Right.
Mutable by default and kept functions.
So it sounds like we're gonna have an underscore leader.
Yeah.
Good to go. Excellent.
There's one that says random by dependent load dash underscore. The internet says it.
Yeah. I've been using this for about a year, and yeah, I was using load dash before that. So it's like I think it's a kind of thing where they maybe like leapfrog one another every version or so. But the point is the concept of having that every function is curryable, where the arguments can be deferred. So let's start to mess with functional composition. So it's gonna read very similar. So it's just to show you the concept. So to do that, we're gonna bring in a function from Ramda called compose. And the interesting thing about compose is that the calls get executed from the bottom up, right? So if when we wrap this inside of compose, we're gonna have to like flip everything over, and filter's gonna be at the bottom, the sorter's gonna be at the top. If you don't like that, then there's another method. It's exactly the same thing called pipe, and it keeps the flow. It seems like the cool kids use compose, so that's what I'm doing. Yeah. There is sort of a. So in addition to compose, we're going to bring in Ramda's filter, and its map, and its sort, right? And then we're going to kind of rewrite this. And I'm going to try to do something that I didn't try when I was putting this together, but let's see if to kind of show up an important point. Sorry?
I'm sorry, you have sort working twice.
Oh yeah, that's going to error out. Yeah, thanks.
So you really want to import sort.
Yep. So here, compose, we're just going to like literally comment the limit of these functions, but we'd have to use the native ones. So we're going to say filter greater than 5,000. We're going to say.
But you lost that function, so you have to type it back in.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
You took away that function.
Okay. Oh yeah. Thanks. Then we're going to do .map. Whoops. Comment delimited. And we're going to call sort. Sort takes in an actual diff. Sort takes. So if we look at sort actually has an interesting quality to it. So sort will function just the same as functions similarly to the native sort in JavaScript, except again, the arguments to sort are curryable, so they can be deferred. Another sort of one concept is called the identity of a function, and the identity of a function is the function returned itself. So if we're going to sort complex objects, then we have to obviously do something like this, or use another Ramda function that'll help you with that. But because here we're sorting primitive elements, we're going to say that you're going to sort on the identity of each element. And the reason for that, the reason I can't sort on the integers themselves is because everything is wrapped in a function. So I have to call an identity function that returns the entity. And I know it's confusing, but that's kind of how this world works.
It works confusing?
It's all confusing. It's all confusing. So then I can just say sort identity here. Yeah, some of these concepts are very hard to kind of explain, and if you haven't seen them before, really hard to wrap your head around. The first time I heard of curryable functions, I had no idea like why you would ever need that, and it probably took me a year to like actually be able to implement one and get why.
What was your epiphany moment? Like why? Because I'm not convinced.
So it was when I was using React,
okay.
and I was just writing pure function components, mm-hmm. and curryable functions helped me kind of write the code a little bit more clean. Okay. And then when you're dealing with Ramda, or maybe now with load-dash functional, you don't have a choice. You have to deal with these functions like that. Okay. It's hopefully I'm trying to circle it all around to see why curryable functions in compose make sense. So let's bring in identity here. So how does compose work? Sorry guys, let me skip ahead. Actually,
is it going to assign key values or something to discrete objects?
Let me see if I can demonstrate identity real quick in the REPL.
I asked if identity was assigning key objects to each of the discrete numbers.
No, that's a separate thing, but that does exist. Yeah. if I have this function f1 and it's called Leo, right? If I call identity on that, it's going to return the same function. So it's kind of just a way to return the same thing you're passing in. And in this, like I know in this case, like it makes no sense because why would you ever want that? You have a reference to f1. But in the case of the sort, it makes sense because I don't have a reference to the individual item coming in. So the only way that I can get it back out is through identity.
Like it converts everything that you pass into like functions. Like
The whole thing is functions, yeah. Everything.
That's what I'm saying. Isn't it ultimately it's not a key so it can do the sort, so it has an identity too. So it's sort of like, I mean, you can do that in React Native. It just messes up unless you put in your math function. You say, hey, by the way, we're setting all these key values to this. If you don't set key values, it breaks down.
It's similar, but the thing is that you're not sending a key value here. It's so that the sort function can get to each individual
Maybe it's sort of
item.
internal.
It's like saying the thing itself.
It's just saying the thing itself, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just there's just no key value situation happening here. It's just
Except maybe internally.
Could you give me like an example of like where that would be kind of powerful to use like everything turned into a function?
I'll give you an example. So there's another concept called the transducers, which essentially, if we go back to the first iteration of this, which was all like with the dot operator, that was working discretely like that filter. The whole dot filter had to complete, then be put into memory, then dot map, and the whole dot map had to complete, and all the first names had to put into memory. With this, you can stream it, so that ultimately you don't have to loop. It's one chain of functions, exactly. And I'm pretty sure you get that by default by if you just keep it all like Ramda functions, you just get that behavior by default. So I mean, if I had kept it in the other implementation, then it would have been like an n squared or something, right? It would have had to loop twice for everything. Here it's just one pass. And obviously this is a very trivial example. It gets more complex.
Does that mean if you list those very long, it would be done processing some of it while it's still dealing with the rest of it?
Exactly. And especially like if you're using like the fetch, like the isomorphic fetch API, the JSON, like if you're calling a web service, a JSON that's coming in, it's not coming in all at once. Like when the code first starts running, it doesn't have the whole thing potentially, right? So this will allow you to just run on the pieces of data that get streamed in, and then hopefully they get streamed back out. So you're never holding like big blocks of data at any given point.
So you get that streaming from the Ramda library.
You get that from the transducer concept, which this does.
Behind the scenes.
Right.
Implemented.
Right. If you use like RxJS, I've never used RxJS, but RxJS has the same thing, and that's actually to that goes even a step further because that's actually to inherently deal with like complex streams. But it's the same thing. Like the point is that you don't have to iterate multiple times to complete something when you can stream it and then it'll just do it all in batches like that. How am I doing on time?
If you stream in and out, and you're trying to do a sort on it, won't you get stuff out of order at some point?
Yeah, with the sort it might break. Yeah, there's operations that'll break it that'll have to stop for it to. Yeah.
So can you defer the entire output until it's done and then dump it out?
Yeah. And you just have to be conscious of that. I mean, that's a very good point. You have to be conscious of when you're going to do something that's going to like break your performance trick here. Yeah, very good point. The sort will definitely break it. And it'll know that, like it'll know it has to stop and then like complete when because it needs everything to sort. That's a problem. That's everywhere. The last thing I wanted to show with Ramda and functional composition. Well, one thing. I don't know if the tests are still passing. I don't know why they're not passing anymore. Let's see. So one thing that's happening here is that well, first of all, I need to call compose, right? So the filter is going to get every single, it's going to get the entire customer's value, and then that map is going to get the filter of that, and then that sort is going to get whatever that map gave it. The bottom or the first operation that runs can have as many arguments as possible as you want, right? So I can potentially say customers, whatever, and I can just keep going.
5,000.
Right, 5,000. Yeah, and it'll get all the 5,000 arguments. Then map can only get whatever filter returns, which is only one thing. That's another reason why currying becomes powerful here, right? Because I can then add additional parameters to, for example, map, if I needed to, which I wouldn't have access to, or which it wouldn't have access to. Does that kind of make sense? Like if I need map or one of these functions that I'm composing to have an additional argument, the only argument that they're getting inherently from compose is whatever it's the previous step passed. But I can pass something from out of context by the nature that it's a curryable function.
How would I do that?
Pseudo thing, right? Yeah. Like some function, like let's say I have another like out, random arg, right? I don't know, random arg. My function, random arg. When my function gets called, the first argument that it's going to have available to it is random arg, and the second argument is going to be the result of map. That's why curryable functions become powerful. Yeah, that was the opportunity I was looking for to like show you that. Yeah, yeah. And how would I write? I was planning on doing this later, but we might as well just keep going down this path. How would I write my function as a curryable function? I would say my function equals random arg, right? Let's keep the name the same. That's going to return, right, another function that's going to take in the map. So it's going to take customers, right? And then it's going to do whatever. I'm just going to return customers again, so. Or I could have said identity customers. Or, yeah. I could have just said identity. I could have just said identity, sorry.
That's given that you always return on the first kind of
yeah.
line, right? So
yeah.
If you were to actually have some arguments there, you would have to nest it, right?
You would have to nest it, or better yet, if you wanted to be real pure, you would just come up with like a bunch of one-liners. Yeah. Yeah. Ramda has a curry method, and will let you kind of shorten the syntax, and you could rewrite it like this.
What is it?
This whole time I thought you were saying query. I'm like, I don't understand what you're talking about.
Curry. Yeah.
So it's not has 10 minutes.
It's connected to not a number, right? Which is nan, curry, nan.
No, the reason for curry is because the mathematician who came up with the concept, his name is Haskell Curry, and that's where the name Haskell comes from.
And the creator of this function also was kind of Indian with Harris.
So let's get creative here and say that in my querying functions, like 5 functions down, some error that's thrown, how do you handle that?
The same. I mean, you throw your error. Yes, yeah, you can catch, and then you can put like a watcher sort of function here. You can just say, huh? You can catch in between, yeah, and then you can say, or you can just maybe like return.
Would the error like bubble up like in the functions, like the next function they call the error, or would the program just stop there and just like bubble up there?
It would stop there. It doesn't. I think like RxJS does like nice bubbling up and all that. This doesn't quite do that. The error handling here is a little bit funky, just because also a lot of times the errors you get is because you didn't pass the right number of parameters into functions. So it's a little bit weird, like to use at first.
And what about if I return like a comment? Does that work?
Yeah, you could do that.
And then, like, pass it to the next function.
You could do that. Yeah, you could do that. I don't typically do that with Ramda. I mean, with that, maybe something like RxJS might be better.
Yeah.
But or a lot of times I just end up handling that like with a promise all or something. But yeah, absolutely, you could defer things up, huh?
Ramda actually has a compose P, which does the same thing. Composes with analysis, just
Oh, there you go. I've seen compose P, but I've never used it. Yeah, there you go. Awesome.
they have like a pipe. They don't like it. So.
Yeah, you have pipe. Yeah, yeah.
So if you were debugging this and you didn't know what's something, and you knew something was breaking between here and here, could you put in, just like you have my function here, have to console log
Exactly.
X, return X.
Yeah, you
so
just
it
have to
doesn't
make sure
actually affect the flow.
you.
But in between each, you're showing the result of the previous.
Yep, you can. Yeah, I can absolutely do that, and that's.
You also can break it into individual parts, debug it, stick all that together.
You could put a debugger on it. You could break it apart. Yeah.
This thing will actually let you put like a breakpoint, and as you go through it, you can hover over each thing, and I'll show you the value that's returning.
With each iteration, can you do that?
Well, it'll give you like a little play pad, and you can go step into or just see what it is.
It makes sense, they're all separate functions, right?
Right.
Chain together.
Right. And the point is that, and again, this gets hard to do because I mean, as applications grow, it's just they're just always a challenge to manage them. But the point is that you have a lot of little functions that do things, that do concrete things, and then you're reusing them constantly, right? And you're not using inheritance or things like that. That those things really tend to break down over time. With this, as long as you're composing and reusing, it tends to manage a little better.
It's kind of not full circle, isn't it?
Absolutely. Everything that's old is new again. Absolutely.
What was that?
Said everything that's old is new again. Yeah.
I started programming procedurally, whatever else, and then recon said the world of objects, and I understood objects, started doing them, and now all that stuff's gone and going back to the same, writing functions.
Right.
Well, procedural and functional are different. Right? It's a little bit subtle, but functional programming is about composition primarily, whereas procedural is just iterations steps.
Sure.
Right. Yeah.
The definition of a function is not technically
The code that I showed at first, that was like a procedural example, right?
But functional programming does actually predate procedural programming because it started in objects, which is before Turing machines, which were at the same time, which is what most computations based on.
Yeah. And it certainly predates object-oriented programming, obviously, yeah.
And then it also comes to like a difference between like inheritance versus composition, right?
Exactly.
So they're good at doing different things, right? Like composition is good at kind of explaining what something does versus like explaining what something is. Right?
Yeah.
So in there you see like kind of like nicely kind of the program flow, but you wouldn't necessarily see what something is in between those steps, right? Like whereas like
Right.
the object-oriented programming it's much easier to see like what something is, right?
Right.
So
But I mean,
they're good at different things, right?
yeah, absolutely. That's why I don't say like one is better than the other per se. I mean, and the reality is like anything else in life, like the hybrid seems to be the most common approach. I mean, the concept of, even in React, like you have, like I said earlier, like you have your component class, and it has methods and it has sometimes state, right? So I mean, certainly it's something that is used in hybrid. The last thing I want to show is like if you kind of take this full on, you could kind of end up with something like this. So as you saw, Ramda has a ton of built-in methods. So this would be like using all Ramda without any actual like method definitions like this, right? So Ramda has a already built-in method that will take your object and bring back a property of it. It's called prop. So here I'm saying map prop first name. It's doing the exact same thing with my function. The filter gets a little bit more complicated because I have to do two operations for it to filter. I have to get the balance property out, and then I have to do a greater than comparison. The currying thing here is sort of flipped. So Ramda has a special placeholder for doing the currying operation on the second argument first, and then leaving the first for later. Right? So if the greater than operator took the operands the other way around, I could have just left it like this. But because it's doing the conditional on saying if the first argument is greater than the second, I have to leave a space for my deferred value to go in. Another trick with this is that there's a flip. There's a flip command, so you can say flip, and then get rid of the placeholder, and then it'll automatically curry it the right way.
Before you use what's
Or use less than, exactly. Or use less than. Yeah, exactly. Or use less than. Absolutely. But a lot of times, like, you wanted to say, like, it makes more sense, like, as you're reading it, like, in English, greater, you know, so, and I wanted to show you guys the little tricks. So yeah, and I mean, the other point I was trying to make earlier is that compose returns a function too. So that you don't have to say that get first names of my best customers is a function that calls compose with an argument. At this point, you can call compose directly by just using the name of your function. It's kind of like as if you're aliasing compose, right? And so it all just works.
So how can you get the value of compose?
You just call this function.
If you call it without an argument, like,
You call it with in this case the customers array.
okay.
Yeah.
So just like
Something funky's happening with my test, but I mean you can see that I'm calling it that I'm just calling it directly. Oh, I see. I'm not calling it. Is the problem? Something's wrong with my test, but anyway, you would just call it like this.
Blame the tests. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh?
Blame the tests.
Yeah. I mean, I'll take responsibility.
Someone wrote the test wrong. Yeah.
The cool thing about the thing with the test though is that's the whole like having it watch and then you work on your code and the tests are like constantly running. That's amazing. Like yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, like look, like if we do like whoops. Let me make a new test file. Test that test. So I'm just gonna say like test 2 plus 2. Like this thing already picked up my new test, and it should tell you. Let's see.
It says past test.
Oh, it's passed because I'm not asserting on it. Okay. So if I say expect that 2 plus 2 to be 5, right? Now we'll see it. Now we'll see it fail. Yep, you see? But I mean, you can essentially like potentially write your old program like this, and then you don't have to refresh your browser or have to restart your service or anything like that.
So is functional programming conducive to test-driven development?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, can you do it without test-driven development, or do you
No,
lend yourself to doing test-driven development? Thus, functional programming like kind of plays really nicely with that.
It lends itself really well because your data and your behavior are separated.
All right.
So like with object-oriented programming, a lot of times to unit tests, you have to like mock the data and then it went into your object and it was a black box and all that. With this, the two are separated, so it's really easy to like to insert different data into your methods.
So so the tests that you're creating, they're a combination of unit test and integration test, or
These are straight up unit tests.
Okay.
Are you saying in practice?
yeah, like how would I put this together?
For methods like these, then you would just write straight up unit tests. I mean, integration tests would come in when you're maybe like actually testing like your endpoints or your app or things like that. But let's say like your whole library is made up of these sort of this sort of thing like functional composition, small tests. Small functions that are reusable. You could unit test the whole thing really easily. Huh?
You can test your compositions that
Yeah.
you built higher level.
You can test your individual functions themselves and be 100% sure that when you compose them, they're going to behave exactly the way you want them. And that's a very powerful thing because that's like one of the biggest challenges, right? Is dealing with the side effects and the complexities of things as the application grows. But I mean, it's like this is great for like keeping your sanity. Like you know these functions do exactly this thing and this thing only. And as you compose them together, you just have inherently you have a better idea of how they work.
So I have a question. Did you see yourself doing? Did you do TDD in practice a lot? Or? I mean, I have that question.
You know what? Like I find that really hard to do. You know, I I think that if it works for you and if it speaks to you, then do it. But I'm not like a 100% subscriber to it.
So like the next question would be, so do you find yourself kind of like testing like each kind of function individually, or do you kind of like just do I guess an integration test or some kind of test where you test the whole composition and then test each function individually, like how the order works?
Let me be clear though. I think that if you were to test a composition, it would still be a unit test. I mean, it wouldn't be an integration test because your dependencies are all still in a block, right? And these functions, it should be pure, so they shouldn't be going out and calling random things, and they shouldn't be importing random dependencies. So even to test the composition, I think technically that's still a unit test.
So in practice, you find yourself like testing the composition more than the actual
I think both. I mean, I think it depends on. I think it depends. And honestly, like unit testing is like the sort of thing where like it's really hard to get into, I think, and it's challenging for a lot of teams. But my experience has been that you get to a point where you really like want it, like you need it, even if you're doing things that are like.
I can't.
Yeah.
For me, without tests, like without doing testing, writing a test first, it's really extremely hard. Actually.
Yeah, there you go. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's just scary because like a lot of times you think what you're doing is simple, and then the edge cases get you.
Yeah, like I feel like I know what I'm doing but that's kind of why I was kind of asking about like kind of that order, because I think that matters a little bit sometimes, right? Like, and I've never done like kind of functional programming and lots of that. So.
I think your intuition will tell you. I don't know. Like if your composition. I mean, I think based on what you're telling me, like I think you're going to do it. You're going to do it probably in all of them. I mean, you're not going to test like Ramda's code, right? Like what gets out the property, the first name. Right. Like you should unit test this thing. I mean, why not? I mean, it would take you 2 seconds to unit test this thing and create an array of customers with random balances and then returning the ones. And then also throwing in nulls and undefineds and things like that. Because I'm sure if I threw like an undefined in there, like the whole thing would blow up. So you want to like test those edge cases, right? So a unit test is the best way to do that.
Where are you at talk-wise?
No, I'm done. I'm done. Compose versus pipe I already went through. Just one thing, the spread operator. If you guys are not familiar with the spread operator in JavaScript, become familiar with it, use it. It's also a functional programming. It's a tool for doing functional, for keeping data immutable in your JavaScript code. And then the last thing is, and this, I'm like a stickler for this, like in my team, whenever I see this, like I cringe and people just laugh at me, whatever, but I don't care. Like if you're writing a for loop, if you're writing for, like stop, ask yourself why.
I have a couple of students here, don't say that because all I do is teach for loops.
Yeah.
So
That's different. That's different. That's different. That's different. If you're just learning to code, if you're just learning to code, like you shouldn't even come to this talk because I'm sure But if you're a professional developer and you're writing for or do while or while, I don't know what all those crazy things, stop and ask yourself why.
So at some point, multiple functions might go away, and we'll be back to the for loops.
I doubt it. I think that old is new again won't apply there.
Or just go to statements and iteration.
Oh, you know what? I don't know, man. They go to might come back, yeah.
Got a question back here? So we're going to open it up for a couple more minutes of Q&A, but the talk is done. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we've got about a few more minutes worth of Q&A, and then we just open it up for mingling and networking. So instead of doing it at the beginning, we moved it toward the end. There are two things I want to state. If you guys don't know about the Palm Beach Tech